Buenas tardes a todas y todos. Bon après-midi.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Everybody, please be seated. We're going to get started with this relevant parliamentary moment and moment in parliamentary terms, which is the hearing which is due from Commissioner-designate Mrs. Ylva Johansson. Please be warmly welcome to the premises of the Committee of Liberty, Justice and Home Affairs of the European Parliament. Be welcome to the works of the European Parliament. Thank you for being here. And yes, be welcome. Thank you so much. Just as a reminder of how the procedure is going to be developed. First, according to Annex 7 of the Rules of Procedure, which contain the guidelines for the approval of the Commission, Parliament shall evaluate Commissioners designate based on general competence, commitment and personal independence. Then we shall also assess the knowledge of their respective portfolio, in this case the portfolio of Home Affairs, and their communication skills as well. I would like to remind you as well that the European Parliament submitted a preparatory questionnaire to the Commissioner-designate with 2 common questions drafted by the Conference of Presidents and 3 specific questions prepared by the LIBE Committee, ourselves. The Commissioner-designate has replied in writing. Those questionnaires and the answers have been distributed to members of this committee in all official languages of the European Union. I would like to recall as well that the Committee on Legal Affairs has raised no objection to holding this hearing from Commissioner-designate Mrs. Johansson. So the debate will thereafter be structured as follows. First, Commissioner-designate will present her case with an opening oral statement, no longer than 50 minutes, please. Then, right after, there will be time for questions and answers up to a maximum of 25 questions from the members of the bench, starting, as usually, by the round of questions which is due to the political groups according to their weight under the so-called D'Hondt system. Question-answer slot of each member will be of 5 minutes, composed as follows. 1 minute question by a member, 2 minutes answer by the Commissioner-designate. Possibility of a follow-up, immediate reaction, 1 minute from the same member who asked the first question, and 1 minute secondary answer by the Commissioner-designate. And that first round will be asked from the representatives, the designate representatives of every political group in this House. Then there will be a second round of questions based on the overall distribution for questions among the political groups, including also a representative of the non-attached, non-inscrit members of this House. At the end of the hearing, the Commission, that is to say the Commissioner-designate, will have 5 minutes for a closing statement. Please have in mind the timing beforehand. Have it in mind, because we are to ensure that the timing and the speaking time, as a consequence, is fully respected. Otherwise, I will have to ask the members to finish or close their speaking time if they exceed it. I wouldn't like to be obliged to interrupt no one here. So please cooperate, and thank you beforehand for your understanding. Interpretation in this particular occasion is secured in all of the 23 official languages. You shouldn't speak too quickly, please, so that all interpretation systems and interpretation cabins are doing properly their work. And the debate will be streamed live on the Parliament internet site. It will also be possible to access a video recording of the hearing on the same site. And finally, preliminary consideration. This hearing happens to be of particular importance to the LIBE Committee. First of all, this is going to be the only hearing in which the LIBE Committee is the committee. We are not sharing this hearing with no other committee in this House, so it falls fully within the competence and jurisdiction of this LIBE Committee, particularly when it comes to lawmaking in this House, to legislative works and pending files. Under the Lisbon Treaty, that means that we are especially competent on European Union asylum and migration policies, border management and Schengen-related policies, and, that is important, EU internal security policy, including fight against organized crime, serious cross-border crime, terrorism, and the prospect of the European Public Prosecutor being set in motion. So we all look forward to our exchange on this relevant array of EU policies which are challenging EU institutions and member states' governments for the last years, as we have seen. We're getting started now, giving the floor to Commissioner-designate Mrs. Ylva Johansson for her presentation. Mrs. Johansson, you're more than welcome. And the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, honourable members of this committee. I'm very happy to be here in front of you. I understand you're going to give me a tough time, tough hours, but I must admit that even though I'm nervous, I have been looking forward to this, because this is a core part of democracy, and you are the directly elected representatives of the European citizens, and you are the ones that have to do the hearing and to say whether I could continue to take office or not. So this I really look forward to. And I also look forward to, hopefully, to work together with you in the coming 5 years. My background is that I've been minister in 5 different governments in Sweden, under 3 different prime ministers, all minority governments. I'm very familiar with working close to different political groups and to find compromises and ways forward with Parliament. And I understand that these are experience that I'm also going to need to go together with you. In 2015, Sweden received more refugees than any other member states according per capita. In 2015, 1/3 of all unaccompanied minors that came to Europe came to Sweden. It was a real challenge. The Prime Minister appointed me with a special responsibility to coordinate all government actions related to the management of migration and integration in Sweden at that time. I am proud that Sweden could give shelter to so many refugees during this time. And I'm also proud that many of them now are integrated in society and contribute to the economy. But at the same time, this made it very, very clear to me that we are lacking a well-functioning and manageable European system for migration and asylum. We really need a common and sustainable European solutions to migration. We need solutions that are predictable both for individuals and for society. Migration and security policies are important and can be mutually reinforcing, but I would like to be very clear from the beginning. They are separate. Migration should not be seen as a threat to security. Security is linked to freedom. Everybody in Europe should have the freedom to live in a society under the rule of law, in the knowledge that public authorities are doing everything in their power to protect them and to combat those who jeopardize that freedom. Threats to security are also threats towards our societies. But I must also say I will be alert to ensure that the very freedoms we are seeking to protect are not being jeopardized by the security measures taken to do so. On migration, my mission is to find a new way forward, one which works and which is true to our values. My top priority, and that's going to be difficult, I understand that, is to develop the new pact on migration and asylum. It's going to be difficult, but I must make also clear, failure is not an option in this case. We must have a common European pact on migration and asylum. We have come a long way, but complex and diverse challenges remain. I do think we now have a positive momentum to tackle them with the European approach, building bridges and not walls between member states. Migration and security feature highly in the political guidelines because we must give citizens a response to the issues they care most about. And both migration and security are on top three of the European citizens. Migration and security touch upon many policies inside and outside the EU. Coherence and coordination are key. Effectively and predictably managing migration, protecting external borders and ensuring security will remain the paramount task for the Home Affairs portfolio. For this, we must find common ground. Compromise and collaboration are the cornerstones of the European way of working together. And this is how I intend to proceed. I know that you, as members of European Parliament and members of this important committee, are very skilled and experienced with this way of working. The European Union is based on values, and these must be our guiding principles. I will not only defend and speak up loudly for these values inside the European Union, but also to the rest of the world. For me, it's crucial to protect our democracies against populism and extremism and to always speak up for human rights. I'm particularly motivated to tackle the tough challenges of the Home Affairs portfolio. There is no portfolio I would rather have. This is the one I wanted. I'm grateful for the confidence that the President-elect has shown by entrusting me with this important responsibility. The threats we face today on security are constantly evolving, and we need to adapt. I will focus on filling the gaps in our approach to EU internal security and to ensure that the Union is equal to the task. My aim is to build an effective security union based on the foundations developed in the last 5 years. This means ensuring that the laws in place are effectively implemented. It means closing remaining gaps in our security framework. Organised crime, drugs, human trafficking, child sex abuse and exploitation are all major priorities for me. Too often, the most vulnerable members of our society are the victims of those crimes. I firmly believe that society has to protect them, and I will be their strongest advocate. I will work tirelessly to close down the space for terrorists to plan, finance and carry out their attacks. Fighting all forms of radicalization is also on top of my agenda. I would like to praise the report of the Terror Committee. Its recommendations will guide me in my work. Key to having an impact is better law enforcement cooperation, all the more so with the quick development of new security threats. We need to foster this cooperation, with Europol playing a vital role in this aspect. I'm committed to a solid and evidence-based approach to policy making in the areas covered by my portfolio. My aim is to apply the principles of better regulations to the preparation of future proposals in my portfolio. As regards migration, as you all are well aware, these discussions have been difficult and divisive. There is an urgent need for common, manageable, sustainable and predictable solutions. There is a new momentum now with the arrival of a new Commission, and I have a very clear mission from the President-elect to propose a new pact on migration and asylum. My approach will be to first listen carefully to different views to help us find common ground. With this Parliament, of course, but also bilaterally with all the Member States. As soon as I'm in office, if confirmed by you, I intend to swiftly meet all Member States bilaterally, and I will keep this committee closely informed. I will be looking at a full range of migration policies: asylum, fighting irregular migration, strengthening external borders, return, legal pathways, integration and cooperation with partners outside the EU. Part of this holistic approach will be to look carefully at existing proposals on the table, and it's important for me to have a gender perspective in all actions that we take. I'm fully aware that this committee has worked very hard in a true European way to define an initial position on many of the asylum instruments. This was vital work on which we need to build. Finding sustainable solutions based on solidarity and responsibility must be a key guide for our work. I want to look at ways to close the loopholes between asylum and return. While we must honour our values and legal responsibilities to those in need of international protection, we also have to ensure that those not eligible to stay are returned. Last year, only 1/3 of those ordered to leave were actually returned. I think that a credible and sustainable asylum system needs a functioning and humane return policy, fully respecting the non-refoulement principle of international law. The political guidelines also stress the need for legal and safe pathways to the European Union. And this, I truly believe, is part of the solution. We should be proud that Europe's share of global resettlement was almost 50% last year. But more needs to be done in this area. I will work with Member States to step up resettlement and to look at developing humanitarian corridors for urgent needs. We cannot tolerate that lives are put at risk in the Mediterranean and also being lost. A crucial element of the new Pact on Migration and Asylum will be a more sustainable, reliable and permanent approach to search and rescue. I have a clear mission to replace ad hoc solutions. Saving lives at sea is our moral duty. This is linked to stepping up the fight against smugglers and traffickers. We need to do more to break up the cruel business model of smugglers and the criminal networks behind. Finally, I would like to underline the risk faced today to one of the key achievements of European integration, the Schengen area. The swift return to a fully functioning Schengen area without internal border controls will be a key objective for me. The more successful our new pact on migration and asylum, the stronger our external borders through the National Border Coast Guard, assisted by Frontex, and the more effective our work against smuggling, the more trust there will be in the Schengen area. And this, hopefully, will also pave the way for further enlargement. My goal is a migration and security policy that works for our citizens, that is balanced and fair, and above all, grounded in our values. I'm fully aware that this is a difficult portfolio. This is what people have been telling me 3 weeks since I was presented as the candidate, the Commissioner designate. But we must come forward in this area. There is no way we can't do it. So this will be my top priority, and I will need your help, your expertise and your experience. in this area to come forward. So it's a great honor if I'm approved to take office on responsibilities, and I look forward to do together with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner-designate Mrs. Johansson, for your presentation. Now it's time for the floor of the members of the bench, starting with the coordinators or the representative of political groups. We're getting started with the list of speakers. I remind you it's two minutes, then reaction, then one additional minute from one to another. We get started with the EPP representative, Mr. Thomas Tobbe. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and let me first welcome that the Commissioner-designate talks about defending our common European values. I do hope that that also means that the Commissioner-designate will also support the European way of life. My question, though, is about our common European security. We see now that we have huge problems with weapons and drugs flowing across our borders. We can also see that we have an increase when it comes to property crimes with mobile organized crime groups going across Europe. So therefore I wonder, what concrete steps are Commissioner-designate ready to take? Are you ready to make more increased budgets for Europol? Are you willing to make sure that we can have a center to fight organized property crime?
Thank you. The floor is yours to respond, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Tobbe. I think it's crucial to defend our common values, but one word on that. We must not be naive. Important values that our union is based on are at threat right now. It's threat towards the rule of law, threats towards minorities. That we have Jewish people that are afraid in our union again, Muslim people being harassed, women that do not have the right to decide about their own future. So I think it's a cornerstone for this, very important for this Commission to defend these fundamental values that we are based on. And security is linked to this, because if we can't fight organized crimes in the right way, as you said, weapons, explosives, drugs are crossing the borders and are also influencing our societies in a way, it's like a poison to society. When people can't have the feeling that they are being properly protected by society towards crime. And we can see that organized criminals are being more and more professional in their way of developing their business model, and we have to step up to that on European level to be able to fight them in the right way. When it comes to property crime, this is one of the priorities right now for the Europol that have been decided together with the member states. So this is also already a prioritized issue.
Thank you. 1 minute to reaction.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do understand that you defend our common European values, but you could please just clarify if you will also be supporting of the European way of life. And I think it's also important that the designated commissioner says that it is important to have Europol focusing more on property crime. But the center of the question were more about, are you open for a discussion to make sure that we establish a specific center to try to combat this? But this is not something that each government and each country are able to do at the moment. And also the question of security, I do know that you're all working, of course, now to make sure that we also have security when it comes to our borders. And it could also be interesting, if you have the time in your answer, if you can elaborate a bit on how you will work with security around our borders.
Oh, the floor is yours. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Of course, I support the European way of life. This is about our values, and I think it's very important that we step up and defend these values, and this is the European way of life. And I truly support that this is a prioritized area for this Commission. When it comes to property crime, whether it should be a centre or not, I think it should not be wise of me to answer on that concrete level today. I haven't taken office yet. So let us continue the dialogue on how we should have adequate funding for Europol and what should be the prioritised areas for the coming years.
Thank you, Mr. Johansson. Now the second floor goes to our colleague, Mr. Claude Moraes, for 1 minute.
Commissioner Designate, as you said in your statement, you have experience of this issue. We saw some terrible scenes on Sunday in Moria refugee camp. We see search and rescue. But as you know, having been on the front line, this issue, this big issue of yours and your portfolio, has the power to drive some very bad politics. And for this reason, it's difficult, and this is why it's a difficult portfolio. And a number of times that you said failure is not an option, finding sustainable solutions based on solidarity is really important. This is what you've said a number of times in your statement. But the problem is that here in the Parliament, this European Parliament, over many years, we have managed to get majorities for all of our key files, Dublin, procedures, regulation, reception. We have managed to do this in this European Parliament across our political lines. So while we have managed to do this, the Council have blocked everything. And this is the problem. So my question to you is, what would you do to make progress on this critical area?
Back to you, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moraes, for this very relevant question. I'm fully aware that the Parliament has been able, as I said, in a true European way, to collaborate and compromise to find a common solution. But we have a blocked situation in Council, and that has been for many years now. So my mission is, of course, to unlock this blocked situation, and I have to do what's needed to manage to do that. And first, as I said, I will, of course, talk bilaterally to all member states to find out what are the most important areas that need to be maybe looked upon in a different way, and then come forward. It's by nature that I can't say exactly how this will be done, because my point is I have to listen first, and I promise to keep the Parliament, of course, very well informed on these dialogues, because you are the ones that have been able to do this. And I think that I've been trusted this portfolio and this mission to find a new pact on migration and asylum, because I am quite experienced. I've been tackling and cracking tough nuts before in my political career, and of course I'm going to use a lot of different things to do that, and I do going to need the help from Parliament and especially from experienced members of this committee. But I do think it's possible to do, and yeah.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Moraes, for a minute of a reaction.
And I acknowledge, Commissioner Designate, the positivity in your opening statement and now, but if this is not to fail again, and your period again not to fail, could I put this question to you? Yes, the Council have blocked everything, and they could do it again, so your new pact may not be a pact. So my question to you would be, given that we have qualified majority voting, it's in the treaties, you would be guardian of the treaties, is that something that you could sustain? I mean, you could ask member states to do that instead of going for unanimity, and if not, then what kinds of proposals could we see to get this thing moving? Otherwise, we see failure again on this critical area that could make or break the EU.
There you go again, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you very much. I think first it's better to have this opportunity to build a new pact on both migration and asylum. That means that we have more things on the table at the same time, and I think this is important to find a common ground. And of course, if I'm being approved to take office the 1st of November, of course I will start to find the broadest compromise that is possible. This is, of course, my aim, to try to have everybody on board. But at the end of the day, we need a new pact.
Thank you. Now the floor goes to the representative of the Renew Group, Mr. Tudorache. The floor is yours for 1 minute.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner Designate, my question will take you to Schengen, which has become over time synonymous with European integration and one of the most visible EU deliverables to our citizens. Yet several member states have been ignoring the rules by introducing unjustified border controls, and instead of enforcing those rules, the Commission has put forward legislation to legitimise such border controls. We have several other member states, Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, which follow the rules and fulfil the Schengen criteria, something that this House has consistently said, but which have been held back for years at the doorstep of Schengen, awaiting the outcome of a political process that nobody seems to pin down, neither in terms of how it will happen or when it will happen. In your written replies to our questions, you state that returning to a fully functioning Schengen area will be an element for the new pact on migration. But, Madam Commissioner-designate, the Schengen rules and spirit are being disregarded now as we speak and have been so for over 3 years. What will you do concretely, and by when, to ensure that one of EU's greatest achievements is not caught or even lost in a long and certainly not easy political negotiation over the Migration Pact? Thank you.
Your turn, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Tudorache, for this question. As I said also in my opening remarks, a swift return to a fully functioning Schengen area without internal borders is a priority, and is also clear in my mission letter. So this, of course, will be a priority for me. And of course that would also include a dialogue with those countries that now are having these internal border controls. We want to get rid of those. But we must also realise that there is a link between a full functioning Schengen area and some of the files that are in the asylum package, for example. The current situation is also that the existing Dublin rules are not really functioning well. So this is, of course, also linked to each other. We have to take that into account. But we can't wait. I agree on that.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Tudorache.
Thank you. Commissioner, I know that yes and no answers are not easy in such contexts, but I will try a yes and no question. Will you start infringement procedures against those member states that maintain temporary controls at internal borders in contradiction to Schengen rules while awaiting the Migration Pact to happen? And second, how will you concretely engage with the Council and the concerned member states to ensure the completion of the Schengen area? And if any, what is the timeline that you give to yourself for that? Thank you.
Turn, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you. First, of course, there's always the last thing is always to start an infringement procedure. That is the role of the Commission. So that it could always be the case. But I do think if I can take office on the 1st of November, that shouldn't be my first thing to do. I think I should start with a dialogue with the countries and trying to find ways forward in other aspects before starting an infringement procedure. And when it comes to the other questions about the timeline and how we should interact together on this, let me come back to that when I have taken office, and then we can discuss this further on together.
Okay, now, as for the Greens, the floor goes now to our colleague, Mrs. Strick.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner Designate, the new Commission continues to focus on external cooperation as a vital part of EU migration policies, whilst the current practices in Turkey and in Libya give reasons for great concerns. In Turkey, Erdogan threatens to deport 1 million refugees back to Syria. And despite the EU-Turkey deal and the cooperation with Libya actually increases the risk of violating migrants' rights as they are pulled back into appalling circumstances back in Libya. Now, you write in your written answers that you will look into how best assess and monitor the safeguards for fundamental rights in all formal, informal and financial cooperation with third countries. And that's to applaud, of course. But what new steps will you take to achieve this concretely? And how will you inform and involve Parliament on these results? And will you ensure that those monitoring includes transparent and independent assessments? And will you also conduct and share with us an impact assessment before the EU enters in such cooperation in order to prevent that violation takes place? Thank you.
You got 2 minutes for your answer, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you very much, Ms. Strick. There was a lot of questions. Let me start. The situation in Libya is terrible. It's terrible for the refugees. They are stuck there under conditions that no human being should be living under. This is the reality. And we are, the Commission and the European Union are now working together with UNHCR, IOM, helping to get people away from the stuck situation in Libya. And this is where we can develop this kind of humanitarian corridors to help people out of Libya, to also help them to be resettled in member states of the European Union. This is the way I would like to develop further. But of course, I must rely on the willingness of member states to welcome resettled migrants, so that we have been having an increase in the number of resettlements during the last years in EU. I'm proud of that. I think that we should continue further on that way. And this could be a way that we could actually help people really that are now stuck as refugees in Libya.
Your reaction, Mrs. Strick.
Thank you, but actually I mentioned Libya and Turkey as an example of that cooperation leads to harming migrants' rights. And of course it's good that we try to diminish this harm being done, but my question is about how can we ensure that fundamental rights are not affected as a result of this cooperation. So if you are serious in your answer that, in your written answer, that fundamental rights of migrants are a key aspect in external migration, would you be willing to take the first step, namely ensuring impact assessments and independent monitoring? And do you agree that this is necessary to keep up your promise that fundamental rights are a key aspect? And if that's the case, are you prepared to commit to this and share your results with the committee? This is really key for us. I mean, and I hope not getting an evasive answer, but really come into, try to answer concretely if you confirm that you're ready to do so. Thank you very much.
Minute. Ms. Strick,
let me first say that the EU cooperation with Turkey and Libya it's not a cooperation that are harming the rights, human rights of the migrants. Migrants' rights are being harmed, and also human rights are being violated, but this is not by the cooperation. So it's also through cooperation with, for example, the UN authorities, we can help migrants. And an important part, I think that we should continue having agreements with third countries, and I think that an important part of that kind of agreement must be to develop legal pathways to the European Union. So this is why we also need that kind of cooperation with third countries when it comes to migration. I would be happy to involve and inform the Parliament when it comes to these kind of agreements.
Thank you. Now, as for the ID political group, it's Onorevole Tardino che ha la parola. Un minuto.
Presidente, grazie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Designate. In the leg, we have a question, something we haven't heard a clear response on yet. You keep talking about balancing up responsibility and solidarity. We know that as things stand today, when it comes to migration policy, that has not been put into practice. Objectively speaking, the system is failing at the moment. The recipient countries are being left on their own at this epoch-making juncture. So what do you actually mean when you talk about a balanced compromise? Are you envisaging a distribution system that will be more than just solidarity? Are you going to try and deal with migrants upstream? Or are you thinking in terms of some sort of temporary pseudo-agreement signed up to by 4 member states, as was recently forthcoming?
To respond.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure I fully followed your question, but then you can ask further on. Well, the member states are facing different realities, and we, of course, in a new pact on migration and asylum, we cannot ignore that the European geographical realities. So that means that we need a solidarity mechanism so that we can have a proper distribution in the European Union. But as I understood your question, you asked whether we should have we could deal with migrants outside the European Union. Was that correct? Was that, sorry, was that your question?
Può precisare?
Could you spell that out? No mic yet for the speaker. I'd like to know exactly what you mean when you talk about a balanced compromise. I'd like to grasp whether migratory flows within your migration policy are something you would try and share out in a compulsory way, or would this be done on a voluntary basis? Could you clarify that, please?
Now, you got it.
Well, of course, as I said earlier to Mr. Moraes, there's going to be a difficult task to find a common ground together with or unlock the blocked situation in Council, together with the Member States. And of course, I can't have all the answers before I started that journey to unlock this situation. But let me be clear on one thing, that is solidarity mechanism is not voluntary in the European Union. That should not be. We have to help each other in this union. The concrete way to do that we have to come back to after I have assessed the situation and what should be the next step for the new pact on asylum and migration.
You can have an extra minute for a supplementary question if you so desire. Thank you. Well, we haven't really had a reply at this point. I'll take note of that. Then, a swift further question. You've mentioned the observance of the principle of non-refoulement and fair process. Those are vital within the European Union. But may I ask you this? Each case is expensive, and it places a burden particularly on the initial countries of arrival. Do you think the European Union can deal with that problem?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Ancora.
Mi riferisco a ciò che lei ha risposto nel...
In your written replies to the questions, you mention observance of the principle of non-refoulement and a fair process, fair proceedings. So can you ensure that migrants can have a fair process in each member state? Well, if we do that, there's a cost attached to that, and what I want to know is whether Europe intends to compensate the member states, particularly the countries of first arrival, for that financial burden.
Ms. Johansson?
Yes, thank you. It's each member state that have the obligation to receive the asylum applications, to process these applications, and to fulfill that they return or if not possible to do the return for the principles of non-refoulement, this is the responsibility of the member states, and the European Commission can help and facilitate and help the member states to deal with this, but this is not optional to follow these kind of fundamental things in our treaty and according to international conventions. So this is also for each member state. It cannot be done by the European Commission, but we need to help each other, we need to cooperate, and this is why we also need this common pact.
Thank you. Now for the ECR, the representative is Onorevole Procaccini. Un minuto.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, Mrs. Johansson. You state that you are ready to support temporary arrangements for disembarkations of persons rescued in the Mediterranean. You have therefore implicitly baked the joint declaration of Malta, signed 10 days ago, which, let me remind you, involves a really limited number of member states and is going to be applied just to those rescued at sea. Considering that just 9% of arrivals is currently the result of search and rescue operations, how would you manage the remaining 91% of disembarkations, commonly called ghost landings of migrants? Furthermore, how would you guarantee that what decided in Malta would not work as pull factor for new departures with the help of NGOs?
Your answer, Mrs. Johansson.
Mr. Procaccini, for this question. This temporary agreement from Malta last Monday is a temporary one. It's going to be discussed, as I understand, at the next DHA Council the coming week, whether more countries will join. I think this is a step forward. This is a temporary agreement, but I think it's a step forward, and it shows a willingness from member states to cooperate and find solutions in this important area. But I must also be clear, this kind of temporary agreements are not instead of finding a sustainable solution for search and rescue. We have to do that, and that's also clear in my mission. And I do not share your view that saving lives at sea and help them to be disembarked in a proper way is a pull factor.
Onorevole Procaccini, un minuto.
Thank you. So you say that you will work on the establishment of a reliable and sustainable approach to search and rescue with the aim of replacing temporary solutions like the one found in Malta. But in this framework, would you publicly state once and for all that just those who genuinely flee from wars or persecutions will be hosted in the European Union, then excluding economic and climatic migrants?
Back to you, Mrs. Johansson.
Each individual that applies for asylum has the right to have this application processed and have a decision whether it's, you are in the right of international protection or not. This you can't know in advance. But I agree that it's important that economic migrants should we should find better ways for legal pathways to Europe, both for resettlement and for legal migrants that come to work in Europe. We are an aging continent. We're going to need more people to contribute to our economy. And I think, and this is why I look forward to develop new ways that skilled workers can come and contribute to our economy in the European Union.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Now, as for the GUE representative, it's Cornelia Ernst. Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm a little bit amazed that you not talked about questions on law enforcement cooperation. And in your written answer, you said that one of your priorities on law enforcement cooperation will be to ensure the necessary technological innovation to ensure that we are able to deal with new and emerging threats. And my question is now, what do you mean exactly with technological innovation for law enforcement? And can you give us a specific example and how you would like ensure that such an innovation doesn't violate the fundamental rights and the protection of fundamental rights?
There you go, Mrs. Johansson, to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Ernst. This is a very relevant and important question you put to me. There are two important aspects here. First, as when new technology emerge and develop, we can see that organized criminals are very quick to take this up, and they use it. And that's why we have to step up to be able to fight them. Of course, we can't face our citizens that are victims for organized crime or terrorism saying we couldn't defend you because they use new technology. I understand this is not what you are saying, but it's important that we can step up to this. But I must also say, when it comes to using new ways of law enforcement and new ways of using technology to protect people, it's also very relevant to take into account that we do things that really protect people, or we don't do things that just intend to do it. So that it's important that we have assessments, that we evaluate things, that we can be sure that we are actually making different on the ground, so that we really can answer on the protection, not that we have been, trying to show our muscles, but it must be in a way that we can actually reach things for our citizens in this area. And of course, it's always important to protect the fundamental rights, and sometimes it's coming as the last thing. And I think that we should also have it also from the beginning when we develop new kind of new proposals in this area.
Thank you. Frau Ernst.
Want to be a little bit more concrete. What do you think, especially of the use of facial recognition in public areas? And these issues are not being regulated in the EU level yet, and some countries are developing surveillance systems of entire cities based on the application of AI, while others have banned it. You know that. And do you intend to put forward a EU coordinated approach or not?
To you, Mrs. Johansson.
Yes, I must say thank you, Ms. Ernst. This is I think a little bit too detailed question for me that should not be wise to answer today. I have to come back on these issues to be more concrete later on.
Okay, Mrs. Johansson, now it's about time to get started with the second round of questions. Members of the bench willing to address questions to you on the order of the political groups in the House. We get started in this second round by Javier Zarzalejos, en nombre del Partido Popular. Tiene la palabra.
Now Mr. Zarzalejos for the EPP.
The past years, horrific terrorist attacks were committed across Europe, but it is true that in the same time, many attacks have been prevented by police and intelligence services. Although a variety of measures to better counter terrorism were adopted, all forms of terrorism, continues to constitute a major security threat. I hope that you will put this fight against terrorism high up on your agenda. So let me ask you, which do you consider to be the most pressing challenges in the fight against terrorism, and how would you address them? And in particular, do you consider the current architecture of law enforcement cooperation fit to deal with new and emerging threats? Or how would you address the threat posed by foreign terrorist fighters and their families returning to Europe? Are you planning to propose new legislation for victims of terrorism, or do you foresee other concrete measures in this regard, given that the previous Parliament agreed that further efforts were necessary to address the needs of victims of terrorism?
Now it's your answer, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Sarsalleios, for this putting terrorism on the table. It's an extremely important issue. You ask what is the most important thing, and I should say trust. We need more mutual trust between member states, between authorities, to help to deal with and to fight terrorism. We need to build and develop mutual trust. I think this is the most important. And then, of course, we can help with new ways of sharing with interoperability and different kind of experts and so on. But I think the core thing is about trust. We can do more, and if we work closer together between member states and between law enforcement authorities. The other thing is to fight radicalization. This, I think, is also very, very important. And this is a task, of course, that has to be tackled in a holistic approach in each member state. But the EU can help and can also deal with expertise in this area, and I think this is very, very important. When it comes to terrorist fighters that might come back to their nation, this is, of course, a decision of each member state to take. But the Commission can help to find the cooperation, facilitate the cooperation, so that people really can be put to court and be punished for their terrorist actions.
Señor Sarsalleios, su minuto.
Commissioner Designate, I'd like to see some clarification on a specific point which I think is relevant when we deal with security threats. In your written questions, you stated that obviously the reintroduction of border controls at internal borders should remain an option of last resort, allowed only where strictly necessary to respond to a serious threat to public policy or internal security. But at the same time, you point out that the high number of secondary movements have led to the questioning of Schengen. I mean, do you consider that secondary movements in themselves pose a risk for security and thus justify the reintroduction of border controls in the Schengen area? And moreover, do you believe that a revision of the Schengen Borders Code will be required?
To you, Mrs. Johansson.
Well, Mr. Sarsalleios, we have to take secondary movements into account when we find and design a new pact on migration and asylum. But I don't think this is the core area to fight terrorism. We can see that we have terrorists that are born in Europe, and they are not coming from outside. They are also being fostered here. They are being radicalized here. So it's not to fight terrorism is not. We cannot only rely on our border controls, but of course we need a better secure our external borders for many reasons. But fighting terrorism, I think, is more complex than that.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Now, for the S&D, there comes the time for our colleague Bettina Wollath.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Designate, you stated that respect for fundamental rights and security are consistent and complementary policy objectives. However, unfortunately, this has not always been the case, as different pieces of EU legislation have been found breaching fundamental rights and thus deemed unlawful by the highest court of the EU. How will you ensure that all security measures respect fundamental rights? And how will you guarantee that any new measure introduced by you in the field of internal security and border management will do so as well as pass the test of the court? And one of the ongoing debates regarding the technical law enforcement capabilities has been on encryption. As encryption is a vital necessity in today's world, do you agree that allowing law enforcement backdoors to encrypted communications would create such vulnerabilities that would undermine the trust and security of all online services and communication? And how would you safeguard encryption in Europe?
Johansson, your turn to respond.
Thank you, Mrs. Volak. This is close to another question that was raised earlier, and of course I have to work together with you how we should find when I'm going to make new proposals that we ensure that they are being prepared in a way so that they will respect fundamental rights also from the beginning, and that's nothing that should come afterwards. But specifically on encryption, I think that when new technologies or when we can see new possibilities for criminals and terrorists to use new technology, it's always that we have to see how we can step up to be able to fight those threats. I think this is crucial. But as I said before, we have to do it in a way so that we can ensure people that if we're finding the right balance between fighting and make security for people, for citizens, and the balance of privacy and fundamental rights, of course, has to always be respected. This balance, to find this in the right way, we have to also know what kind of impact do we really have on security, so that we're not doing things that will just be a new decision that will not be implemented or not be really making people having better safety for our citizens. But if we can be sure that we can do things that are really making things safer, then we can find the right balance. And this balance, of course, I have to find together with you and together with the Council.
Thank you, Frau Wolof. Again,
Thank you.
1 minute.
Let's change the field. In your written answers, you state that after evaluation, you could foresee an update to the Europol regulation where necessary. Considering the strict confines of the treaties concerning the Europol mandate, what kind of an update do you foresee that would not require a treaty change? Will you commit to bringing the Europol regulation in conformity with the regulation of the protection and personal data for the EU institutions, bodies and agencies as foreseen?
Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Ms. Vola. This is an issue that I have to discuss with the Commissioner for Justice, because I think this is a shared responsibility between our portfolios. So I will be happy to have that discussion with my colleague, the Commissioner for Justice.
Thank you. Now for the Renew Group, it's a turn for our colleague, Mr. Malik Atmani.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Johansson, I would like to focus on the external dimension on migration with you. EU citizens are still waiting impatiently for a sustainable European asylum and migration policy. Do you agree that a sustainable policy entails stepping up EU initiatives to provide adequate shelters for refugees both within the EU, for example Moria, as well in countries of origin and transit? Do you also agree that this also requires stepping up a readmission and return of irregular migrants, and what are your concrete plans to do so? What steps will you take to improve also the implementation of the Return Directive? And will you take the lead among your colleagues to step up international cooperation to tackle irregular migration by third country agreements and break the power of the cynical business model of people smugglers, and at the same time work on legal pathways? Can the EU citizens expect from you, Mrs. Johansson, visible results before summer 2020? Thank you very much.
Your time to respond, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asmani. This is truly important issues. I will step up with the efforts on return. I think, as I also said in my introduction, we have to be more clear. We have to have better processes, and we have to close the loopholes between those that are eligible to and those that have to return. We have to be much better on this. We have to step up on these areas. We do need to tackle irregular migration, and we do need to have closer cooperation with third countries in this area. And I think to destroy the business model also for the smugglers, this is really, really important. And we can see that those that are smuggling people, they are also smuggling other things. So these are the organized criminals that really they're making a lot of money out of this, actually. So we have to fight that business model. There is a role to play together with finding agreements with third countries. And this is going to be, of course, where I have to work very closely with the Vice President for the European way of protecting the European way of life, that has to coordinate these efforts, and also to work with the Commissioner for the neighborhood, and for the Commissioner for international partnership, it's called, I guess. Yeah. So this is where we can find solutions, and I do think it is possible to find good win-win solutions with developing better and new legal pathways to Europe. And as I said earlier, we have a situation where we are in high need of skilled workers in Europe. And of course we need to find agreements so that we do not foster brain drain, but I think we can have that kind of good agreements with third countries.
Thank you. Your minute again, Mr. Asmani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Yes, maybe to make it more concrete, can you deliver us 3 concrete actions or 2 concrete actions, what you will do before summer 2020? Because Renew Europe will be scrutinized also based on a concrete agenda and with concrete results. But that's the only thing how we can deliver to our citizens. And this is a topic for our citizens, and that we know. And that's the reason why I want to hear concrete from you, concrete proposals.
You go, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you. I understand that you want that. I can't give you because, you know, the situation when if you decide so, I will take office, then we have a situation that's been blocked for 3 years in this area for the asylum package. So my mission is to unblock this situation, to find a new pact on migration and asylum, and it should not be wise of me to promise you that you have impact on the ground in Europe next summer. I think that's not realistic.
Okay, now back to EPP representative. It's Mr. Hitzvegi. Your turn for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. When it comes to the measures against mass migration, our experience is wholly negative. It has become obvious that the Commission applies double standards in evaluating the efforts of member states. Thus, the protection of the EU's external borders, which contributes to the security of the Union as a whole, is not considered to be an act of solidarity, unlike the reception of illegal immigrants. Commissioner-designate, do you agree with the assumption that protecting our external borders is one form of responsibility and solidarity? What do you intend to do as Commissioner to put an end to the double standards so that the various forms of solidarity are measured by the same yardstick? And what do you intend to do as Commissioner so that the masses of economic migrants wanting to come to Europe or already here are treated differently from refugees genuinely in need of protection? Thank you.
Addressed by our colleague, Mr. Balas Hitzvegi. Please, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Ms. Hidvegi. First, I must say I do not agree that we have a situation of mass migration to Europe right now. We had that in 2015, 2016, but now we are down to levels that also before the migration crisis. I do not agree either that we have double standards. But to ask you on your question, to secure our external borders, it's very clear that the Commission has played a role to assist member states to protect the external border. And that's why we are stepping up so very much on Frontex, for example. It's, of course, to be able to better protect our external borders, and the role of the Commission and the agencies is to do that together with the Member States that always have their right to protect their borders.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Back to you, Mr. Hidvegi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner-designate, let me ask as a follow-up about cooperation with third countries, countries of origin, countries of transit. What concrete steps do you envisage, if you're elected Commissioner, to work with those countries, especially in light of the fact that in a decision of this Parliament, the AMF fund for the 2021 to 27 period only foresees 5% of the costs. There foresees a 5% cap on those kinds of programs and spending, whereas the Commission's own experts, as I understand, estimate that to be at least 15% for that period. Thank you.
Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Hidvegi, for that following up question. And I must say the approach that we will have with the agreements with third countries will be different from country to country. And as I said earlier, this has to be developed together with our close cooperation with the Vice President and also together with other commissioners. So I would be happy to come back to discuss this with the committee later on.
Thank you. Now it's S&D again. Our colleague, Mrs. Tanja Fajon. The minute is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Johansson. I will come back to Schengen because I seriously think it's threatened today. And you draw a clear line between the reform of common European asylum and migration system on one hand and the return to a fully functioning Schengen area of free movement, stating also in your written answers that return to a fully functioning Schengen area will be a key aspect of the new pact on migration. Now, given how complicated the situation is to find some wise and meaningful reform on common European asylum system, knowing that there is quite a mess, I would say, in the Council, do you believe it is wise to link those two, so the reform of common European asylum system and the Schengen border code? Is it then your intention to propose a specific new legislation on Schengen to the new pact on migration? Does that mean that you will withdraw the current proposal that is on the table and we have already first reading in the Parliament agreed? Because how long will you then allow all member states really to continue to break the rules? Because I think it's really illegal and unacceptable what is happening.
Mrs. Fajon, now your answers. Mrs.
Thank you,
Johansson.
Ms. Fajon, and happy to have this question so that I can clarify things. There is a link between Schengen and functioning asylum, common asylum system in Europe. This is not I that make that link. There is a link between those, and we have a situation where the current Dublin rules are not being followed. This is the case, so there is a link, and I do think it's easier to solve things when they have more things on the table at the same time. But let me be clear, we can't wait to solve this internal border controls in Schengen if there's going to be have to be waiting for a long time to solve the other issues. So it's not acceptable that they block each other, but if possible, to solve together in this new momentum that I do think that we have now, then it's good because there are linkages between each other. Whether I know the very important job and very hard and difficult job you have been doing on many of those files that have been proposed by the current Commission on the asylum package, and I really appreciate that work, and I do hope that we can continue on that, but I can't promise you to do that, because I need to unblock the block situation in Council. I need to have this dialogue bilaterally with Member States. So I can't make that promises today, but I do hope that we can continue on those, but I can't promise.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Additional minute for you, Mrs. Fayon.
I do hope, nevertheless, that you will not allow these illegal practices that we witness for longer than 3 years, longer than needed. Because don't you fear that while saying that you support all those member states, or that you don't plan as a priority to bring infringement procedures, that you are also failing to respect one of the fundamental pillars of the EU Schengen area of free movement? And just add on that, when do you expect next enlargement of Schengen to happen? Will it be with Croatia? And is it about technical or a political process if one country, for example, fails to respect the rule of law? Thank you.
Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you. I have to come back later to this committee on the expansion of the Schengen area with new members. I have to come back to that. Of course, as I said earlier, infringement procedure is always an opportunity for the Commission, but this, I think, is not wise to start a new term as a new Commissioner with on that foot. I think I'd rather start with a dialogue with the Member States instead.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Now it's again the turn for the Greens. Mr. Eric Marquardt, the minute is yours.
Yes, I'm over here.
Yes.
And I will ask my question in German. Wir haben ja in den letzten Jahren erlebt.
Over the last few years, we've seen that it's very easy to create fear by talking about mass migration. I found it was very important in that regard that you said we should be proud to help people in need. It's also important that you said that the NGOs in the Mediterranean are not a pull factor. We can't say that the external border protection is more important than dealing with the situation in Libya, which is in a situation of civil war. Can we really be proud of the situation on the Mediterranean? And can't we better support the NGOs? What can we do to support them better? What is your specific plan to ensure that search and rescue at sea can be provided by state providers?
12 minutes to answer, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Marquardt. Up until today, this year, more than 900 lives has been lost in the Mediterranean. This is an ongoing catastrophe. We have to stop people from getting into those boats. We have to develop legal pathways to Europe. And we have to stop smugglers. Even though less lives have been lost this year than the year before, it's still a terrible number. So I think that the approach, my approach, will be to focus on stopping the smugglers, helping people to find other ways, not entering these boats. Having said that, of course, we also need a better system for search and rescue, and that is, of course, the obligation always for member states, but also for others to save lives. And For the situation of NGOs, I know that Parliament have been asking for some guidelines on clarification, where that we have to clarify that genuine humanitarian assistance never should be criminalized. And this is an issue where I look forward to look closer into, and that might be a way forward.
Thank you. Herr Markert, noch eine Minute.
Dankeschön.
Well, yes, I know maybe this isn't the right place to give specific detailed answers, but it's also very difficult for people who are stuck in the civil war country of Libya and don't see any other way out as to get on a rubber dinghy to escape the civil war. Every single day people are drowning. I think we as a parliament should be able to expect that we don't just talk about maybe, but rather we should be developing guidelines that do not make humanitarian help punishable. Can't we just do something to return to the situation we had in the past, without the member states, where we had Frontex doing the job, without NGOs having to fear having their captains sent to prison? So maybe you want to make me happy. Maybe you could just tell me that you want to return to that previous situation. Maybe you could say specifically what you want to do.
Danke vielmals. Now, complementary question and answers.
Thank you, Mr. Marquardt. Refugees that are stuck and live under terrible, non-acceptable conditions that nobody should live under in Libya right now. The solution for them is not to go on these dangerous boats in the Mediterranean. The solution is that we should work together with other actors on humanitarian corridors, and that we should step up on resettlement.
Thank you. Now it's ID, again, ID Group. Mr. Peter Koffert, you got 1 minute for your questions.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be speaking in Danish. Som dansker så ser jeg med stor bekymring på den kaotiske...
Thank you. As a Dane, I'm very concerned about the chaos that the Swedish policy on immigrants has caused. Criminal gangs, rape, ghettos, social patrols. There's a link between this policy and the social issues hitting Sweden at the moment. Now, I've read, Ms. Johansson, that you're proud of that Sweden. Proud was the word you used. But even the left in Denmark is worried about this. And they want checks on the border between Denmark and Sweden as a result. Your Swedish immigration policy has gone out of control. So I wonder, if you're going to be a commissioner, will you be applying this failed Swedish policy on immigration to EU immigration policy? And will you also meet Denmark's request for border controls?
First, I must say I do not agree with you on the situation in Sweden. And I repeat, I am proud that Sweden could give shelter to so many people during the migration crisis. But that was also very clear to me from that point that we could not, it's not sustainable to continue without the functioning European common system that can manage migration in a much better way, and that we have seen so far. This is very clear to me. To your answer is, of course, I'm not going to be the Swedish commissioner. I'm not going to impose Swedish policy. I'm going to be a European commissioner, and I'm going to propose European proposals, and I'm going to develop those together with Parliament and together with Council, and of course together with the rest of the Commission.
Mr. Koffert, you got 1 more minute.
Tak for det, formand. Det var jo ikke helt svar på mine spørgsmål. Altså, jeg vil...
Thank you very much. Well, that wasn't really an answer to my question. What happens if the Danish Parliament votes by a majority and asks the Commission to say that we would like to extend border controls and that they would do that again and again. Polls and election results show that the majority of Danes and Danish politicians elected by the Danes support the border control on our borders. As Commissioner, are you going to act over the head of Danish politicians and say you're not allowed to do that? Or will you accept this legitimate demand set by the Danes that we control ourselves, who comes into our country and who doesn't?
Thank you. We have already touched upon this issue from several other questions, and internal border control is not according to the Schengen rules, and this is why we have to return to a fully functioning Schengen area, and that is very clear in my mission.
Thank you again. Now it's the turn for ECR. The floor goes to Señor Jorge Buxadé. Un minuto.
You have 1 minute. Thank you, Chairman. I shall be speaking Spanish. Commissioner-designate, in your replies to the written questions sent by our committee, you said that the NGOs play a crucial role in saving lives in the Mediterranean, and we should acknowledge their contribution. However, this very afternoon, you've pointed out just now that one of your Commission's objectives will be to bring an end to the business model of the smugglers. Well, above and beyond ideology and preconceived ideas, public opinion in Spain and Italy are increasingly aware of very serious instances of collaboration between some of these NGOs and the mafia organisations indulging in human smuggling in the Mediterranean. What will your position be? How will the Commission act? Do you believe it should continue constantly to oppose the decisions of Member States or to respect them?
Thank you, Mr. Buxad Vilalba, for the question. I think it's important that we respect true humanitarian assistance at sea. A lot of NGOs are doing this effort right now, and I think they're doing a great job on this. But that should not be mixed with smugglers. As I said earlier to a question, the Parliament has asked on guidelines for this working with the NGOs, and I'm happy to look closer in if that could be a way forward together with Parliament to finding these guidelines. I don't know if that's answer to your question.
Señor Buxadé, su segundo minuto.
Mr. Buxadé, now you have your further minute. I don't believe that is a response to my question. Obviously, the issue is whether in those cases where the administration or the courts in a given member state establish that there's collaboration or cooperation between, I stress, certain NGOs and those mafia organisations who are carrying out trafficking in human beings in the Mediterranean, what will the position of the Commission be? Will you respect the provisions of the directive, namely that the member state will take a decision when penalties are warranted, or are you going to continue to make all sorts of political statements encroaching upon the sovereign decisions of member states? As many of my colleagues have said, this brings up the point that the main effort for security in Europe and maintaining the Schengen system is carried out by those countries with external borders.
Hansen.
Thank you. I don't. Of course, member states should prosecute smugglers. This is what you should do. Of course, that was the role of the law enforcement, to prosecute smugglers. But I must say also that those who carry out true humanitarian assistance to those in need should not be criminalized.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Now over to the PP again. It's going to be our colleague, Mrs. Lina Dupont, for 1 minute.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Vielen Dank.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Designate. The debate so far has brought out very clearly that asylum and migration are going to be the most important part of your portfolio. You said that we have got momentum at the moment. It's a new legislative term, a new commission. So there is movement in the debate. But so far, I don't think we've had enough concrete answers. So a follow-up question. Can we expect a text with concrete proposals in your first 100 days? And what might these look like? If I've understood correctly, you don't want a completely new package, but which existing proposals do you intend to pursue? And how will the procedure in the Parliament look?
Turn, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Ms. Dupont, for this question. And you won't have a concrete answer, because my first mission and my first priority is to unlock the blocked situation, to find a common ground for a new pact on migration and asylum. It's going to be difficult. Others had tried before me. So that's why I can't promise you which will be the new proposals and which proposal will I continue on. I hope to continue on those that we have come far in this Parliament on, but I can't promise you right now, and I can't give you the concrete answers, because this has to be to be decided after a dialogue with the Member States to be able to open up this blocked situation. And I don't think that there will be new proposals the first 100 days.
Thank you. Noch eine Minute. Frau Dupont.
Vorsitzender, Sie werden verstehen, dass ich nicht...
Well, I'm sure you'll understand that I'm not entirely satisfied with your answer. But I'll move on to another area that we've already touched upon in the debate. You said you want a new, sustainable, feasible approach to search and rescue. But you said also that we need to allow these people to disembark if we save their lives. So how does this work together with combating people smuggling? What kind of concrete actions do you imagine? How can you prevent this business? How can you prevent criminal organizations being involved? And how can we try and prevent people from getting on the boats in the first place?
Again, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Pon. I think that the last thing you said, I fully agree. We have to avoid people getting on the boats in the first place. So that's why it's going to be so important to work together with third countries to find agreements. And I know that these countries don't want to have these smugglers and organized criminals acting in their country to get people on those boats either. So I think it's a way forward to work together with agreements with third country and also to focus on better legal pathways to Europe.
Thank you again. Now it's Renew political group. The floor goes for 1 minute to our colleague Jean-Christophe Chrétien.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Ms. Commissioner Designate, I understand that you tell us again and again that you want to propose a new pact on asylum and migration and that you want to compromise and find cooperation with member states. And I will tell you that Parliament on his side, we have done our homework. We voted on a mandate to step up into negotiations. And in your written replies, you hint at withdrawing the package while building on what has been achieved so far and taking on account the position of both European Parliament and the Council. But the problem is not between Parliament and Council, the problem is within the Council. So I would like to understand why you think that a withdrawal of the files of the Common European Asylum System, why a withdrawal of these files could unblock the situation in the Council. Why do you think that it might work?
Your answers, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Ketjen, this is a very relevant question, and I understand that this is difficult when I come and I can't answer that concrete as you should expect me to on these issues. But you are so aware of the situation with this blocked situation. It has to be unblocked. And I have the mission from the President-elect is to have a broader approach than the asylum package, to find a new pact on both migration and asylum. This is my priority, to find this, to develop this new pact. And to do this, some people think it's a mission impossible to find a new common ground in the Council. I don't think so. I think it's possible to do, but I have to be very careful so that I don't bind my hands on my back from the beginning. So I have to be quite open on what we have to do on in this area. I hope not that we need to withdraw things that have already come far in Parliament, but I can't promise you not to do that. That is what my mission, my answer.
Back to you, Mr. Ketjen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Johansson. You know that the Parliament would like to have an achievement on the European asylum system, and I understand that you want to widen your view and take into account migration questions. Do you want to take into account questions of border control and Schengen questions as well, or do you think that these questions should be beside the questions of migration and asylum, or do you want to take them into a package?
Parliamentary response, Mrs. Johansson.
I have to come back to that, what should be exactly into a new pact or not. But I think that when a lot of different things are on the table at the same time, that is my experience, that it's sometimes easier to unblock situation when you have different things. Whether they should be part of a pact or not, I have to come back to later on.
Thank you again. Now we open a turn for the non-inscrits, non-attached. It's going to be Onorevole Ferrara per un minuto.
Grazie Presidente. Thank you very much, Commissioner Designate. I will talk in Italian. Sul nuovo patto per la migrazione.
On the new pact for migration, I hope that it simply doesn't mean withdrawing the proposals that are currently stuck in the Council. I was the rapporteur on the Asylum Procedures Regulation, and I can tell you that we put a lot of effort in this Parliament to achieve a solution that can be supported across the different groups. And I think it's important to defend the package approach so that we do not end up with imbalances between different member states. As for this new package, do you think that this should include legal routes to migration? You've mentioned this already. Do you hope to follow up the Lopez Aguilar report on humanitarian visas? And do you think that we should be continuing the third country reception centres on the south of the Mediterranean so that people would be able to apply for asylum without having to get on a boat across the Mediterranean? These could be centres run by the UNHCR in cooperation with the European Agency.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Ferreira. This is, as I said in my introduction, the Parliament and also you personally have done a lot of job on these files, and you have made a lot of compromises and collaboration, and I do really appreciate that. And I think this is the true European way of working together, to find compromises through building bridges through different party groups, and this is what we need to continue on, that way of working. And of course, the proposal is not a solution. But I have to find a new way forward, and that's why I don't want to promise things here. But I think this won't put anything, that won't solve the issue, so that is not. Well, yes, legal ways must be a part of a new pact. That's why it's both for migration and asylum. So the legal pathways to Europe should be part of that. And I'm aware of the proposal of humanitarian visas. That could be a discussion that we can continue on, but I must also say that I think it's a little bit easier to come forward on resettlement and humanitarian corridors that are already being developed and being developed quite well the past years. But let us continue a dialogue on this issue.
Onorevole Ferrara, la sentiamo ancora, un minuto.
Give you another minute, Ms. Ferrara. Thank you. Moving on to another area, internal security and organised crime in particular, I'd be glad to know whether it's part of the Commission's intentions to provide follow-up to the Grim Temporary Committee's report, having a European body to address organised crime, including mafia-type organisations. That's now an international organisation, which sadly is destroying citizens' trust of public institutions. And then on the Child Sexual Abuse and Child Exploitation Directive, I'd like to know what you intend to do so as to ensure that the Member States fully enforce this. What actions will you undertake to step up the struggle against the sexual exploitation of minors? What specific programmes might you identify to punish the offenders and look after the victims?
Thank you, Ms. Ferreira. These are really important issues, and organised crime and mafia-type organisations, they are like poison to society. They there's a cohesion to cohesion in society, and therefore it's not only the victims of the crimes that are suffering, the whole society and trust in society is suffering. So that's why it's so important to step up in these areas. I have to come back on the concrete actions when I have taken office and can be more concrete on the steps that we need to take. But I know that there's a lot of files and not a lot of proposal that has been adopted by this Parliament and by Council. So I think that a lot of things has to be to focus on implementation of the decision that had already been made. But I don't exclude that we should also continue with other proposals in this area, and I have to come back to that. The same when it comes to child sexual abuse and how Europe are actually, a lot of these child pornography are being, they are hosted in Europe. So we are actually, in our European Union, in member states, this is really a very, very terrible crime that are being committed. And we need to have better cooperation also between the law enforcement to fight these kind of child sexual abuse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we go back to the S&D group, and the next question is going to be addressed by this side of the podium, because the floor goes now to our Vicepresidente, Onorevole Pietro Bartolo. Ha la parola per un minuto.
You have 1 minute.
Buon pomeriggio, grazie Presidente.
Still have no mic for the speaker, unfortunately.
Nella sua lettera di incarico.
In your letter, the new sustainable approach to search and rescue was part of your terms of reference. In your reply to a question, you say that in recent months, the Commission has played a vital role in helping coordinate the distribution of those landed on the request of the Member States. Now, even though search and rescue operations are governed by international law, and in principle the Commission has no responsibility to carry out such coordination, it's true that more can be done providing financial and practical support to Member States to help save lives at sea. Which tangible actions would you undertake to respect the requirement in the letter from the President-elect to ensure that there is that proper coordination of search and rescue operations?
How is your answer?
Thank you, Mr. Bartolo. And as you pointed out, there is a role for the Commission to play in this area, and it has been playing this role to coordinate and to also to facilitate how we can help the whole chain when it comes to search and rescue. So it's not only about search, the specific search and rescue, it's also the embarkation, it's also to facilitate how to distribute people to the right country when to the process for the asylum application, for example. So we have to facilitate, I think, this chain, and this will be part of this sustainable solution that President-elect asked me to develop in this area.
Onorevole Bartolo, ancora un minuto.
You have one minute, Mr. Bartolo. Thank you, Chairman. To be more specific, on the basis of your previous replies, what are your plans or options in governing search and rescue operations on the basis of the principle of solidarity, according to which all member states should fairly be sharing out the asylum applications, respecting the fundamental rules of the European Union and international law?
Thank you. We recently have a new preliminary agreement on Malta between 4 countries. I understand it's going to be discussed in the GHA Council next week. So let's see what will be the outcome of these discussions. I have the impression that there is an opening, a new constructive approach from member states to this area. I hope so, but I think it's too early to draw conclusions from that, so let me come back in a dialogue with Parliament on this later on.
Thank you. Now it's EPP again. Ça va être 1 minute pour Madame Nadine Morano.
1 minute for Ms. Nadine Morano. Chairman, I'm going to speak French, if I may. Commissioner designate, I'm surprised that in your written answers you say that to fight illegal immigration you're going to develop legal pathways. You don't outline how you're going to return illegal immigrants. And that's essential if we are to deal with the immigration issue in a firm, humane but responsible way. The rule of law is often ignored when it comes to migratory issues. You have legal decisions for return which are not being respected. However, respecting legal judgment should be the counterparty to asylum awards. There are 500,000 people who have been refused asylum, but only 160,000 have been returned. That's only a third. This is an injustice. People want real answers to that problem. So I wonder how you intend to return large numbers of illegal immigrants.
Commissioner designate.
Thank you, Madame Morano. I think this is a very important aspect. We need to step up together on return of those who do not have the right to stay in the European Union. I think this, as I said in my introduction, the right to apply for asylum, the right for international protection links very closely to that those that do not have this right also should return. So we have to make this functioning, and it's not functioning well right now. Only 1/3 that had a decision on that they should leave had returned last year. So this is really an area where we have to step up. But the Commission is not the one who return people. It's the responsibility of member states to do the readmission. But the Commission can help. We can help with readmission agreements, for example, with third countries. We can help facilitate in other areas. So I'll be happy to discuss whether the Commission can do even more to help on readmission so that we can have a more efficient system. I do also think that a more and quicker and more efficient asylum procedure in member states could also help.
Thank you. Madame Morano, on vous écoute encore.
1 more minute, Ms. Morano. Well, I was expecting you to talk about the readmission agreements. We've only got 17 with Ivory Coast, Tunisia, Mali, and the African Union states. And a lot of migrants come from them and are covered, but many are not covered by these agreements. This is a priority, don't you think? There are also 17 billion for development in Africa, but you haven't talked about the African Union's responsibility or the responsibility that weighs on the countries of origin. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Morano. I do think that we should develop more readmission agreements with third countries. I think this is a very important part where the Commission actually can help to build that. And also I know that in some cases Member States have their own agreements and I think also we need a cooperation between the Commission and Member States so that we can have the most efficient way for readmission because we need that.
Thank you. Now it's Gu again. The floor goes now to our colleague, Mrs. Malin Björk, for 1 minute.
Tack så mycket.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll be speaking Swedish. Welcome to our committee. Well, as you've heard today, there are some people here who want to see Europe going the same way as Trump, or taking the Orban variant. That's to say, with racism, xenophobia and attacks on migrants' rights. But there are many more, as you've seen, who look towards a different European approach, where we stand up for human rights, where Europe remains a continent that people want to go to and can arrive in. Will you stand up for the Geneva Convention? Will you stand up against the repressive policies of closed borders? There are racist forces that want to have an Australian model where asylum is dealt with in third countries outside the EU. Are you prepared to refuse any similar proposals? Will you ensure that we don't subcontract asylum? And then I'm thinking particularly of Libya. I'm looking forward to an honest answer.
Tack så mycket för frågan.
Yes, thank you very much, Mrs. Björk.
I agree with you that on a global level we can see severe threats towards migrants and toward the right for asylum. And this is, I think, something that is scaring. And that's why it's so important that we protect the European way of life, because the European way is that we, in our treaty, have very clear defined the right to apply for asylum. And this is, of course, what the Commission, which as a Commissioner, I will always defend our fundamental values and the treaty. And this is very clear, and we should be proud of that. That makes us, that a difference between our union and other parts of the world, that we have these clear rights for migrants to apply for asylum, and that we also said that we have these clear values that we stand for. And this, I'll be happy to fight for both here in the European Union, but also on a global level.
Thank you, Mrs. Bork.
Tack så mycket. Jag skulle nog ändå vilja ha...
Thank you very much. Well, I want just a little bit of extra clarity. Will you refuse any proposals on extraterritorializing the asylum procedure to third countries? My other follow-up question is on Libya. We've got documented human rights abuses that we are complicit in if we're silent. Will you end Europe's shameful cooperation with Libya and its Coast Guard? You talked about safe legal routes to migration. And I've been a rapporteur on relocation, or resettlement rather. It seems that there are a lot of deals and foreign policy manoeuvres. Can you ensure us that resettlement is based upon UNHCR and is humanitarian in its objectives?
Your turn.
Thank you, Ms. Björk. First on Libya, I can't see how things will improve in Libya by stopping the cooperation from the European Union. We know that there are Libyan coast guards that are threatening or violating human rights. What the EU does is to educate the Libyan coast guards in these aspects of humanitarian rights and how to protect human rights in their actions. I do think we have to come back to what should be done in Libya, but I must say I don't think that ending the cooperation that we have with the humanitarian organizations, UNHCR, IOM in Libya, and also educating the Libyan Coast Guard in humanitarian rights. I can't see how that will improve the very, very difficult and terrible situation in Libya. On resettlement, the cooperation with UNHCR is, of course, the cornerstone for resettlement. But I won't say no to all other aspects of resettlement. I think that resettlement is a very important way for legal ways to Europe, and I do think that we can step up in this area, and I hope to do so together with the Member States.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Now it's S&D again. We're going to be hearing a question from our colleague Javier Moreno. Tiene la palabra por un minuto.
1 minute. Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Ms. Johansson. We're coming surely towards the end of the proceedings now. Now, the protection of women is part of the DNA of our group and its action, and so we have a positive assessment of your firm commitment to incorporating the gender perspective into all the policies you will oversee. Now, one of my questions is regarding the fight against people smuggling and protecting victims, particularly women and children, particularly girls. Unfortunately, trafficking in human beings creates many victims and earns a lot of money, 5 billion a year, and so it must be a priority task for the incoming Commission to prevail upon the Member States to step up cooperation with third countries and ensure that the victims have access to justice. With that in mind, how are you going to ensure that the 2011 directive on people smuggling is properly enforced, particularly when it comes to protection of women and girls? What financial resources will you be proposing?
Mrs. Johansson, your time to answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moreno Sanchez. And first, on the implementation of the directive of 2011, I have to come back on concrete actions to you later on. But I must say, on trafficking, this is really something that concerns me a lot. And we know now that trafficking, half of the victims of trafficking are European citizens. This is not a problem that is crossing our borders. It's a problem that we have here in our union. And a huge majority of those that are victims for trafficking are girls or young women. I think it's extremely important that we step up the fight towards trafficking. And I must say I am ready to consider new legislative proposals in this area, because we know that the criminals are earning a lot of money on using these victims, these girls. So I will look into and be ready to consider new legislation in this area. I will also say I'm ready to consider whether we should have a new strategy for fighting trafficking. I do think that we can do more in this area in the European Union. I think it's a shame that 50% of these victims are EU citizens. We have to do better.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Señor Moreno, otro minuto para usted.
A further minute, Mr. Moreno. Thank you. Thankfully, you're not alone in your struggle. You have the EU coordinator on trafficking in human beings at your side, as well as Europol and the European Centre Against people trafficking. How do you envisage strengthening the ways and means of taking action and cooperating with them. And then minors are a particularly vulnerable group, particularly unaccompanied minors. What action do you envisage to ensure that this group, which is exposed to all sorts of sexual and labour exploitation and even organ trafficking, can be properly protected, and above all that they can receive help, because in many of our countries they're in a legal limbo?
Your reaction, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Moreno Sanchez. These are all areas where we have to work more together to step up. And of course, I am responsible for many of those institutions that can help us do it. But we must also see that we have to fight this culture of impunity when it comes to trafficking, and also to help the victims. So I'd be happy to come back to you later on proposals, or to assess whether we should make some new proposals in this area.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Now it's Greens again. We're going to hear a question from our colleague, Monsieur Damien Carême. Damien Carême.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Johansson, I was fairly well disposed to you before I came. However, what you've said has been rather vague, and I'm a little bit concerned. We seem to be forgetting that behind what we say here, there are men, women and children who are suffering and under threat of death. And so we need urgent answers to these questions. Now, we know that you want to stop people having to get onto boats. But once people are on the boats, are you prepared to launch a European search and rescue mission at sea? And are you going to unblock the discussions on Dublin? It's absolutely urgent now to do that. Why not look for a majority rather than unanimity for that agreement? Are you ready to demand that Council respect the treaties and move to qualified majority rather than try to work with working on consensus, which is just an excuse for inaction?
Answering the question, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Mr. Carême. When I've been answering a lot of questions on search and rescue, and I have no other answer than those I already given on this. We have, as I see it, a new constructive approach with this preliminary agreement on Malta last week. There's going to be discussion in the GHA Council, as I understand it, next week. I hope this will open up for a new ways forward, but of course it's in my mission also to come forward to a more sustainable approach on this issue, and I have to come back to you in this honourable committee on this issue on search and rescue. When it comes to the Dublin regulation and the file that is blocked in the Council, nobody would be happier than me if I could just unblock it, and then we are here. Don't think it's that easy, unfortunately, because then it had already been done. So this is, of course, part of my very difficult and hard task to find a way to unblock the situation. And as I said earlier, I'm probably going to need a lot of my experience, and I also going to need probably some other proposals on the table at the same time to be able to unblock the situation. And I answered earlier, I think that, of course, as an incoming commissioner, if I'm approved, of course I will start with a dialogue to find as a broad consensus as possible. But at the end of the day, we must come forward to make a decision on a new pact.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. Monsieur Carême, sa réaction, une minute.
Oui, il y a une importance aussi à évaluer.
Yes, we also need to evaluate current measures before going towards a new pact. So how are you going to evaluate the current asylum measures, and by one, because the time frame is important, and how are you going to ensure that any new proposal is based on the conclusions of these implementation reports and also are tied in with an impact assessment that has been drafted together with representatives of civil society?
We already have 7 files on the table in the asylum package. I don't want to start from the beginning. I hope that we can build on what the Parliament has already been working so hard on. So my first approach will not be to start from the beginning, but my first option will be to continue on what's already been there. But I have also to go through this process to find out what's needed to unblock the situation. And I'll be happy to keep the committee very informed about this, and of course to continue cooperating in this area.
Thank you, Mrs. Johansson. And now in this second round of questionings, we're going for the final shot. Again, back to the EPP. It's going to be Mr. Paulo Rangel. The floor is yours for 1 minute.
Commissioner.
Excuse me. I made a mistake.
Yes, it's Renew.
Excuse me. Yes. It's still Renew. I'm sorry about that because I escaped pre-last questionings from the Renew. It's Moritz Körner. You have the floor.
Chair, I'll be speaking German. Madam Johansson, in European security policy, something is going wrong. The 22 Islamist terror attacks in the last few years. And in pretty much all of those cases, the culprit was known to the police before the attack. In order to improve better police cooperation, we've been collecting more and more data. We thought we'd be able to find the needle in the haystack faster by making the haystack even bigger. So my question to you is, will you change this failing policy, or will you continue to collect more and more data? Are you planning for a new data storage directive, or do you want to extend existing directives on the subject?
Herr Körner. Now the floor is yours, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Körner. And I must say, in many aspects, I agree with you on this. I see that we must improve the cooperation between the police forces and also together with Europol in the European Union. As I answered to another question earlier, that the most urgent thing I think is trust. We need mutual trust. We need police forces to actually work closer together, and I think that this is what we should develop, and we should use the data we have. We have a lot of opportunities that we are not using well enough today. This should be focus. I would not exclude that it might need to have also further proposals, but I think that we have a lot of things to do by implementing what had already been decided, and also to build on this mutual trust so that we can work closer together to fight organized crime and terrorism.
Körner, Sie haben das Wort.
Ich bin sehr glücklich zu hören.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that you want to invest in police cooperation and strengthen cooperation in practice. But I have two more specific questions. There's the trust in e-evidence. There are different levels of trust between national investigative authorities. Will you be continuing to pursue this e-evidence proposal? And continuing on the subject of trust, do you think that in the extension of the SWIFT agreement, would you continue along the lines proposed by the Parliament?
I didn't follow the last question, sorry.
Zurück.
Ob Sie bei der nächsten Fälle
when we come to the next extension of the SWIFT agreement, when it's further extended with the US, will you be inviting the European Parliament for consultation first?
To you, Mrs. Johansson, to answer.
Thank you. When it comes to e-evidence, I have to come back to you later on how we can proceed on that issue. I think there's a lot of different aspects to take into account. And when it comes to international agreements, I will be happy to have a consultation with the Parliament.
Okay, and now it's the final shot. I announced from our colleague, Mr. Paulo Rangel. The floor goes to you. 1 minute.
Commissioner designate, I want to warmly welcome you. Being the last question, let me point out that after this hearing, you risk to be known as the comeback commissioner, as you have, in key topics, systematically answered that you have to come back to the subject. In the past 5 years, we have revised completely the Union's landscape on information systems. We have addressed loopholes and increased synergies. In your written answers, you state to be committed to implement these new systems. However, in the previous term, we faced enormous obstacles from some political groups, not the last, your political group, S&D. The last example was the VIS, which your group voted overwhelmingly against. So being rapporteur for this file and bearing in mind the SD position, are you ready to commit here to set a clear deadline and an appropriate budget to put it operational? And in detail, we believe furthermore that children are better protected if we can store fingerprints of the age of 6. Do you support this proposal that, by the way, was supported by the Commission?
Now, over to you, Mrs. Johansson.
I think that if I'm rightly informed, this is going through the trialogue right now. Isn't that the case? Yes. So I hope that will be a good, smooth process in the trialogue, but it will not be wise of me to set up a specific timetable before we have gone through this trialogue, but I do hope that we can be able to implement it as far as possible, because we're really going to need it. And then when you say I haven't answered to your questions here in the committee, of course that's up to the committee to decide whether I have to judge if I have answered in a correct and sufficient way or not. That's not up to me.
Rangel, again.
So I take note of that. And then I'd like to relate to an important part of your portfolio that was not addressed here today, because it's impossible to address everything. And it is to ensure greater consistency between the internal and external dimension of security. Online disinformation, interference with electoral processes are a paramount example of such link, and where a more coherent and a muscled approach is required from the European Union. So in the next 5 years, what do you plan to do in this field of disinformation, interference in the electoral process, and so on?
And back to you, Mrs. Johansson.
Thank you, and I fully agree that there is a close link between internal and external security, and we have to build on that, and that's a very important aspect. And when it comes to these concrete threats towards our democratic procedures, I have to work closely also together with other commissioners in this area, because this is crucial that we can protect our cities, our societies, and our democracies. This is going to be very crucial.
Okay. That will bring this second round of questionings and answers to a closing statement, which is due according to the rules of the game, which are our rules of procedure. According to our fair understanding of what due process of law is about, if this should be a trial, you would have the final say, and you will have it, Commissioner-designate Ms. Johansson. So I would like to thank you all of you for your contributions, of having refrained so efficiently, good discipline, parliamentary discipline, to the timing that was scheduled in order to this relevant exercise of political and parliamentary scrutiny on the quality and character of every commissioner designate, and in this particular case, our commissioner designate for the portfolio of Home Affairs and Interior, Mrs. Ylva Johansson, to actually take place in such a satisfactory fashion that we have carried out for the past couple of hours and some 15 minutes. So it's now your turn for your final statement. You have a right to put an end to this conversation we just had through a brief closing statement of, I suggest, no more than 5 minutes. So the floor is again back to you, Mrs. Johansson. Thank you for the effort and endeavor that you have carried out in order to please the concerns, to meet the concerns of all the questions that you have just listened to. And now the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, honourable members of the committee. I was, as I said in the beginning, I was looking forward to this, and I was right. There's a lot of competence in this committee. There is a lot of knowledge on how things are going on the ground in each member state. You are truly representatives of the citizens of the European Union, and therefore I hope to be able to work close together with you in the coming 5 years. I think that will be, I really look forward to do that. If I'm confirmed, of course. I think we are in the beginning of a journey together, I hope so, to deliver policies which are of key importance for our citizens. Both migration and security are on top of citizens' agenda and things that they really think that we should solve and deal with on a European level. So we have an obligation to deliver on that. As I said earlier, it's clear to me that we need to defend our values inside of the European Union, but also to bear in mind the impact of our rules outside the Union. I think that the European Union should always lead by example. Fundamental rights will never be an afterthought for us. That's the European way of life. On migration, as I told them, my ambition is to solve this. Our common success will be judged not only if, but also how we manage to set out the way forward. I believe it should be a European way forward. That means common solutions, manageable solutions, sustainable and predictable solutions, based on our values and fundamental rights. We clearly need common European solutions to a managed system of migration. We also need, on search and rescue, more sustainable, reliable and permanent approach, which is part of a holistic pact which includes legal and safe pathways. The European way of doing this in this area is to safeguard the right to apply for asylum and for that application to be assessed swiftly and properly and individually. Persons who do not have the legal right to stay should be returned in accordance with our legislation and common rules in a dignified way. This is linked to stepping up the fight against smugglers and traffickers. The best interest of the child and a gender perspective are preconditions for what we do and need to be present in all our policy making, and that I will ensure you. On security and work against terrorism, we have come a long way, but we have to do more. In my opinion, we should not hesitate to take further steps to improve European cooperation and work to further enhance trust between law enforcement authorities. As I said to you many times now, I think that trust is a key cooperation in this area. More generally, well-functioning cooperation in the area of my portfolio is crucial for the faith that our citizens have in the European project. As I stressed earlier, compromise and collaboration are the cornerstone of the European way of working together. In the area of the portfolio I was entrusted 3 weeks ago, I believe we need to find more solid European solutions, better cooperation and work to enhance trust. Trust should always be at the heart of all our work together, whether it's between the European institutions, between the member states or vis-à-vis the European citizens. Trust should be the cement of our European construction. This is how I intend to proceed if confirmed. And as I said, I look forward to come back and to collaborate with this this committee with that high level of competence and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. We thank you, Commissioner Designate Ylva Johansson. Let me just express, surely on behalf not only on the podium of this LIBE committee, but also on behalf of the bench of the LIBE committee, that we have appreciated your efforts to be at the height of the stature of the portfolio you're bound to fill with your character and your commitment. That you have just noted here has been outstandingly high. So much committed to the wide array of issues which are encompassed in your portfolio to be migration, free circulation of people, Schengen package, asylum issues, and all the agencies which are in the constellation of the LIBE committee, and security, which was in the outgoing committee, was impersonated by a commissioner in itself, separate from the Home Affairs portfolio, and you are bound to cover them both. So surely, if there's such thing as a comeback commissioner designate, that would be a good signal, because this conversation couldn't bring all the issues to an end. The conversation is open-ended, the conversation is open, and we thank you for having exchanged your views throughout this process. I would only add, if I may, that President-elect Ursula von der Leyen made it explicit through the presentation she made before the plenary of the European Parliament with the occasion of our voting favourably her ability to fill the job as President of the next Commission, that she would do her best to enhance the capacities of the European Parliament, including legislative initiative by the European Parliament, which means in a committee as ours, which is a truly law-making body, which is a truly law-making committee, a sign of respect to not only the pending files, which are bound to become adopted European legislation, but also initiatives that have been taken and endorsed from the LIBE Committee to the plenary of the European Parliament, as it was the case, just to put an example, of an initiative report of which I was honoured to be the rapporteur on the humanitarian visas. So it is obvious that the LIBE Committee is wide in its competences. It shows when you see that the LIBE Committee is going to be involved in the hearing of at least 8 commissioners designate, being the leading committee, being associated, being invited. At least 8 of the commissioners are going to be examined before the members of the LIBE Committee, although there is only one portfolio which fully and completely and exclusively falls within the competence of this LIBE Committee, and that is why we have not shared this hearing with anyone else, with any other committee in this House, because it is precisely your portfolio which draws all the attention, the energy, that you have seen through the questions times that you have just addressed throughout this session. We thank you for that, and I'm only announcing that as for the assessment, the coordinators are to meet later on this very day. By 1900, the exact place, the location of our meeting will be announced to the coordinators in order to assess the outcome of this hearing. Thank you, Commissioner Ylva Johansson. The session is adjourned.